Hi guys, and welcome to Studio One with me, Gregor. So what I've noticed time and time again, reading and monitoring all the feature requests from you guys, is that a lot of the feature requests that reach us are already implemented since years in Studio One. It's just that apparently not enough people know where to find them yet. And this is where we really need to talk about track options, one of the most overlooked yet super handy set of features available in Studio One. Check them out. Alright, so let's talk about track options in Studio One, which are super flexible and very quick to access. And if you want to see them, you just click on the wrench icon that you see here on top of the track list. Now notice that I have unticked all of these boxes for now so that we can go through all of the available preferences one by one. I'm sure there's at least one of them that you weren't entirely familiar with, so stick around. The first one is solo follow selection. So by default, when I have soloed a track and I'm changing the track to the one underneath, you can see that the solo is still staying exactly in place, right? It's not affected by me switching the channel or anything. But when it's activated, this is actually the case. Watch this. See, and that is kind of cool when you want to A/B like two settings, compare them closely with each other, or if you really want to hone in on certain issues that you heard on a track. This is a great way of doing so. Then we have instrument input follow selection. So this is only referring to instrument tracks, which you can identify with this piano symbol over here, as opposed to audio tracks, which have these wave symbols. So when this is activated, instrument input follow selection, then any instrument track that I select is going to have record armed and monitoring enabled. This is really cool when I record my drums, for instance. Then I want to go down to play my bass line, and then I want to play a sequence. Right, and if I record all of that consecutively, then it's really handy to just step to the next instrument like that. Makes for a super fast workflow. The next option is identical in name, audio input instead of instrument input follow selection, but it's slightly different because this only refers to record arm. See, now I'm on track 1, now I'm on track 2, now I'm on track 3, but monitoring doesn't follow suit like it did with instrument input follow selection. And that is because we don't really want to decouple record arm and monitoring for software instruments because we need to hear them. Whereas with audio tracks, it's quite likely that we're actually monitoring them from the hardware. So enabling monitoring here would, make it sound doubled. But if you do software monitoring and these kind of things, and you want these behaviors to change at the same time, both record enabled as well as monitor enabled, you can take this option right here and tick this box, monitoring follows record. As soon as that's enabled, you have the same behavior for audio tracks that we just seen with instrument tracks. All right, next up is editing, and that is enable crosshair cursor for tools. Now that's a really important one. And if you have that disabled, you're going to have a really hard time editing in Studio One, I have to say. So right now I have the split tool on my alternative tool, which I can activate by holding down Command on a Mac or Control on the Windows PC. But when I now want to use this tool to split something, I can't really see where I am exactly, right? It's kind of guesswork. And I've seen some people go as far as try to relocate the cursor and then try to use that as an orientation point. Please don't go that far, okay? All you need to do is just enable crosshair cursor for tools, and now I get my own independent crosshair. This also works for the range tool, as you can see, and that's just super handy to make precise selections. Now this crosshair is also available on the Smart tool, and I would highly encourage you to keep that activated by clicking on that bracket symbol that you see on the left of the toolbar. When that's activated, you have the range tool in the upper event area, and you have the regular mouse pointer in the lower area. That is really handy if I want to, make a selection over something and then move it out. And of course, I also get the crosshair for that. Next up is locate when clicked in empty space. This is actually one of the most common feature requests in Studio One, and it's implemented since years. So this basically means that you don't have to click up here in the timeline every time you want to relocate your cursor. You can just click in the empty space and relocate that way. Up next, we have cursor follows edit position. Now, this is something that a lot of people from other DAWs, such as Ableton Live, really appreciate. And you can see this is also activatable via hotkey or by just clicking on the symbol here. Does the same thing. And what that means is that when I select an event, I also jump to the beginning of it with the cursor, like so. See? And it also works on individual nodes, which is really, really cool. Next up, we have automation follows events. So this is something where you would assume that you would always want this behavior, right? Like here, for instance, I have a Rhodes piano kind of thing, and I gave a little bit of movement to the cutoff filter, a bit of modulation, so to say, to make it a bit more animated. Can make that a bit more extreme with the transform tool that we looked at last time. And when I'm now copying this event over, right, let me just decouple this so you can see it very quickly. Then I kind of want those cat ear automations to come with me, right? But what if we use the transform tool to kind of fade in this automation really, really gradually, and then from here on out, we just want this automation to end? Well, in that case, we probably would prefer if the automations would not follow the events. See, right now, the automation stays in place. So this is just really cool that you can switch it on the fly depending on the situation. And yeah, definitely make use of it. Up next, we have colorized track controls, and this is extremely handy, especially when you're working with smaller track heights, right? It can be sometimes hard to see which one belongs to which track now, especially if you had like 70 tracks going on or something. Well, this option really helps. Once that's activated, you see that the tracks are colored depending on the color that is set here for the overall track, and it just makes it so much easier to spot which event belongs to which track. Up next is show channel numbers in tracks, and this is quite confusing sometimes for beginners because they would expect to find the same amount of channel numbers that they find with tracks. In Studio One, tracks and channels don't have to be the same amount all the time. Why not? Well, because if I work on my drums, for instance, right here, I want to work on them in one pattern. I don't want to have a different pattern for my snare, for my hi-hat, for my kick drum. It would be very inefficient. But I still want to mix them separately. For instance, I want to have a different kind of compression or equalization on my kick. I want to have maybe some kind of reverb on my snare. I want to EQ my cymbals, you name it, de-ess them. I don't want to have all the same processing on my entire drum kit. Right? But to avoid that we have to split it up in multiple tracks, like 8 tracks, just to do our drums, we didn't go for this traditional one-to-one relationship. Also, you can just simply assign, MIDI data to a different instrument instantly. So this gives you a lot of flexibility switching out instruments without having to switch all the MIDI notes around. Now, with that being said, you can see that there's now a slight offset between the channel numbers and the track numbers, because this goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So analog and lab in this case is number 6, but it's actually linked to channel number 8, and that can be quite confusing sometimes. By activating this option, show channel numbers in tracks, you get rid of this problem. You always see the exact channel number, and this indicates, okay, there's clearly like a multi-out setup going on here, for instance. Next up, we have show track notes, and this has been a very frequently requested thing in Studio One, and it finally was introduced with Studio One 4. So this can be used if you want to make some mixing notes, like kick needs some work, the take 3 was pretty good on the vocal, gain at 10, EQ at 80 Hz, like some kind of guidelines for your preamp or whatever, always put it to 11. All that can be set right here with the track notes. Next, we have show chords on events, and this is only applicable for audio tracks because it's so easy to change chords on a MIDI event that this would make for constantly changing data, which we wanted to avoid. So in this case, I have this audio track here from my Rhodes piano, and by activating it, I'm actually seeing the chords that this is playing. And now I could drag them to my chord track, for instance, to process them further and to start transposing all my MIDI notes accordingly, and audio, of course. If you want to learn more about the chord track, definitely check out my Studio One with Gregor playlist here on YouTube, where I'm covering this feature more extensively. Up next, we have ignore plugin latency. So right now, as you can see down here, I have a plugin latency of 4.4 milliseconds, which is caused by some plugins such as the Analog Lab 4 and the Neutron and others, often also plugins that have some kind of look ahead going on. And if I'm sequencing external hardware, that can sometimes lead to, a clock that's not totally tight. By bypassing the plugin latency temporarily, I'm setting this 4.4 milliseconds back to 0 so that I have 0 latency going on in my sequencing. But please remember to put that back on once you have recorded your synthesizer and such, because otherwise the plugin delay compensation doesn't work properly anymore. Then we have monitoring follows record, which I've already covered previously. And the last one is monitoring mutes playback, like in a tape style. Normally, we can only monitor with the monitor enabled button, but as soon as we enable monitoring mutes playback, we get more of a tape style kind of behavior. So now it's activated, nothing has changed so far, but when a record arm, now the monitoring is effectively enabled as well. When I hit playback, now the tape machine starts playing the recording, which means that I can't record or monitor at the same time. But as soon as I hit record, that's the moment where I'm back into the software monitoring and I can also, start recording over it. All right, so let's look at a practical example, what this could look like in a classic workflow. So I'm record enabling. This is also enabling monitoring. I hit record, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. And let's say we want to keep everything of the sensation and performance, but just the last 1, 2, I didn't get that emotion so much. So let's just punch in right there, but not record over it yet because we don't want to lose it. I just want to see if it works first. And that's where the monitoring button comes into play. It allows us to monitor, mute the recording, but at the same time, not totally commit by overriding the recording right away. I hit record, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. And if I decide, this is really it, this is gonna push the song over the cliff, then we can use the record button to record this part, and that will also immediately mute playback.